Okay. Big election yesterday in Ohio. We heard about that, and we will talk with John Rothman coming up at 11:30. But first, I really want to talk to our double Pulitzer Prize winning Los Angeles Times columnist. He has written stories in recent days about the complexity of corporations taking a stand on the war between Israel and Hamas, the Google antitrust trial not being more open to the public. He's talked about Speaker Johnson wanting to cut the IRS budget in order to give that money to Israel. Bidenomics has been one of his topics. I was reading all of his articles last night, but he also wrote an article recently on the trial of Sam Bankman-Fried. Let's bring on Michael Hiltzik, everybody. Yay, here he is. Hi.
Hello.
Thank you for agreeing to.
Well, thanks for having me on. I just want to tell you, I only have one Pulitzer.
Are you sure? Because I've read that you had two. The internet doesn't lie, Michael Hiltzik.
I would know. I've been nominated,
oh, you've been nominated for more than
times,
one.
But I've only won once. Now, that being said, I've written not just
my bad. I'm sorry.
column about the Sam Bankman-Fried trial, but two. The second one ran this morning.
Oh, okay.
So, it's fresh.
Oh, it's a freshie. Good. Well, let's talk about the one that you wrote 4 days ago. That one I thought had some really interesting questions about whether you think this is kind of a verdict for the whole crypto industry or whether it's specific fraud in this case. Can you talk a little bit more about, whether this is just your run-of-the-mill fraud that can happen in any industry or whether this is more kind of systemic within the crypto industry as a whole?
Sure. So I think it's one can say that a fraud is particularized or individual when it happens in the context of a regulated, legitimate industry. So when Bernie Madoff, ripped off, so many people for billions of dollars, you could say, well, that's Madoff. He was a crook. But it doesn't really mean that the whole stock and bond market is crooked. We know that's regulated. We know that there's reasonable safety and protections for investors in that market. So we can look at Madoff as sort of a peculiar case. That's not true in crypto, and the reason is that crypto generally, as I put it, through and through, is a scam.
Yeah.
There's nothing legitimate about it. There's no regulation that's worth anything involved. So what Sam Bankman-Fried's case tells us is that the whole system is crooked and foul. He didn't do anything in there that basically, many other participants in that market are doing. There are more criminal cases already on the docket involving other so-called crypto exchanges and crypto deals. We're going to see a lot of that because basically, fundamentally, with crypto, there's no there.
Yeah. Well, and that's kind of what your article today is about, is kind of talking about what Silicon Valley venture capitalists are looking at, what they wanted to believe all along and really sunk their money into all along, and how maybe, I don't know, are they not ready to let go of the lie or not ready to say we were wrong?
Well, I think they're embarrassed, number one. Look, the firm that I sort of focus my column today on is Sequoia Capital, which is the second largest venture capital firm in Silicon Valley. It's one of the oldest, maybe the oldest, or the second oldest. It dates back to the 50s and 60s. It really has been a leader in venture investing for decades and decades. And they plunged into Sam Bankman-Fried's firm, which is FTX, in 2022. They put first $150 million into the firm. Then they invested another $23 million in a fund he was starting. And this is all done with barely any. I mean, they say there was a rigorous due diligence process, which is what investors, want to do when they're looking at a company to invest in. They really, they subject that company to, basically a magnifying glass.
Hmm.
They said they did that, but it's fairly clear that they did not, because the questions that due diligence would fundamentally ask were not asked, or they would have known
Yeah.
that this was FTX was just a hive of red flags. But what they were sold was the idea that FTX was going to make gobs of money, and implicitly they were going to do it by ripping off clients and investors. And that's fundamental to the whole crypto marketplace, is because there's no true value in crypto tokens, Bitcoin and everything else. It's wide open for basically predatory behavior. So here's Sequoia, which claims to be, and I think legitimately has been treated as the most some of the most sophisticated investors in the entire nation, if not world. And they're saying, well, gee, we were lied to by Sam Bankman-Fried, and that's what
Yeah.
happened. He deliberately lied to us. And, my point today is that he couldn't have lied to Sequoia if Sequoia wasn't willing to accept the lies at face value, and didn't do the job of investigating the company they were putting all this money into.
But why wouldn't they? Why wouldn't sophisticated investors who, likely in their life as investors have seen things go belly up before, have seen bad investments roll through the door. Why wouldn't they have been more savvy?
Well, there are a couple of factors there. One is that they were seduced by the prospect of making huge profits, essentially,
Hmm.
whether they really had internalized the idea that this was going to be done by predatory behavior by FTX or not. They certainly bought into the idea that this was the coming thing, and that there was a lot of money to be made, no matter how it was going to be made. The other factor is that the general behavior of venture funds is that you invest in 100 companies and maybe one or two pay off. You take losses on the other, 98 or 99, but the one that hits so well that it covers everything. And Sequoia has invested, at the ground floor in Google and Airbnb and all sorts of other companies that really have been major successes. So they
Hmm.
looked at it and they said, well, we're not putting that much into FTX as a percentage of all the money we have, so we'll take a plunge on it. We'll take a flyer,
Right.
and we'll see what happens. Now the fact that it blew up so spectacularly that it became an embarrassment to Sequoia is sort of the downside of that devil may care, devil take the hindmost approach to investing.
The the penalty phase for Sam Bankman-Fried gets underway in March. I read you said he could get, after being found guilty of 7 counts of fraud, up to 110 years. I also read somewhere else 115. It's maybe they're rounding up and you're rounding down, but it's a long time, like more than 100 years in prison. Does that seem excessive? Is that a sentence that you expect in this case? And will a judge use it to send a message to people in Silicon Valley, like you can't invent these schemes and get away with it?
Yeah, the 110 years or the 115 years, whatever it actually
Yeah.
works out to be, that's the maximum sentence for, when you combine and add up each of these crimes. It's what's in the
Right.
law. Now, typically, we don't see the maximum sentence being imposed by a judge, and there's a whole system of pluses and minuses, or there's a system of minuses from the maximum that's in play in the federal judicial system. You get credit for certain things. You get credit for showing remorse. You get credit for committing to compensate your victims. You get credit for, there's a
Yeah.
certain extent to which the ultimate sentence is keyed to how much you've stolen. And now in this case,
Yeah.
there's as much as $10 billion
Gajillions. Yeah.
was
Yeah.
stolen. So that's not going to work in Bankman Fried's favor.
No.
So, and 110, 115 years, he's not going to live another 110 or 115 years. So
Right.
anything over his lifespan
Yeah.
would be, in the nature of a message. But, it's certainly likely, or at least, the smart money says he's going to be sentenced to, several decades
Yeah.
in federal prison.
We got a question from Edward. Thank you for the contribution, Edward. Says, to hedge against the dollar, would you invest in gold and silver or Bitcoin? Do you acknowledge that Bitcoin has some fundamental benefits?
Well, I'll answer the second question first, and the answer is no. Bitcoin has not been shown to have any fundamental benefits at all. There was a period in which it was seen as a way to basically to commit crimes for money, ransomware.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody would basically hold, companies or an institution's computer data hostage and say, we'll free it up if you just send us X in Bitcoin. And that was based on the notion that Bitcoin was anonymous and couldn't be traced. We know it can be traced. So that's sort of faded. Nobody has really produced a use argument for Bitcoin or any of the other cryptocurrencies. No one has pointed to anything that suggests this is good for anything, and certainly not that it's better than than legitimate
Right.
currencies for anything. All of the virtues that it supposedly has are not really virtues, but in our financial system, they are drawbacks. People say, well, if you pay for something in Bitcoin, you can't reverse that transaction, and that's good. Nobody can take the money back. But of course, for the average consumer or investor, you want to be able to unwind a transaction if it turns out that you haven't received the merchandise you paid for or the service, or you've been ripped off or what have you. So, its inviolability is not
Yeah.
a virtue. And in terms of hedging against the dollar, I can't really give
Yeah.
financial advice, but gold or silver, they have established values. You can look up the value of gold or silver, instantaneously. The spot market is always there. Hedging against the dollar, I'm not sure that in recent years, gold or silver or any precious metals have actually worked to hedge against real currencies. It just hasn't worked out. So, but there's nothing to Bitcoin. So basically, you're not hedging against anything. You're just basically buying something that's got a stated value and hoping you can sell it to somebody else before that value drops. And this is what we call the greater fool theory. You own something and you try to basically fob it off on a bigger fool than you are.
Yeah. Do you think this guilty verdict on 7 counts for Sam Bankman Fried is just that? Or does it send a message to the crypto industry that that industry is dead if it wasn't already?
Well, I think that, you can't persuade the crypto industry or crypto fans or fanatics that what they are doing is worthless. I mean,
Mhm.
that's basically not the pitch that they accept. What one would hope is that this is a message to legislators and regulators that they are trying to push something that isn't fit for human consumption.
Mhm.
We have legislators in Congress who've been pushing crypto for a while. They should be ashamed of themselves.
Yeah.
We have regulators who've been trying to basically, step on the face of crypto for a while, and they should be encouraged. But the only real worthwhile regulation is to wipe it out. Sam Bankman-Fried, when he was riding high, one of his things was he was promoting a regulatory scheme for crypto that really amounted to no regulation at all. It had the veneer
Of
It had the
course.
veneer of regulation, but it was all based on the idea that crypto is something special and it doesn't fit well with the existing regulatory system. Even commodities uh, executives, who are in the same sort of field, were saying, we're not in favor of that. We like regulation. If you take regulation off, people are going to be ripped off. So,
You, you
and
wrote
now, of
in,
course, whatever scheme Sam Bankman-Fried was pushing in Washington in mid 2020, that's dead now
yeah, it's
because
gone.
he's got obviously no credibility.
You wrote at the end of one of your articles, and I wasn't sure if you were being facetious or serious. Keep your eyes, you say, as I write this, the next scams are bulking large on the horizon. Keep your eyes on artificial intelligence and self-driving cars. Do you think we're going to see some scams going on with this emerging technology as well?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, anytime you have something out there that is hard to explain to the layperson,
Hmm.
it's going to be over promoted and it's
Yeah.
going to be basically, over described or over
Hmm.
determined. And I think AI, there's an enormous amount of hype in the AI space already. And we see that just absolutely, absolutely everywhere, not only now, but, ever since the birth of AI in the 1950s, there have been waves of promotion of AI that have all basically come apart. And I haven't seen much this time around that says that this time is different.
Hmm.
Self-driving cars, look, Cruise, up your way,
Yeah.
managed to persuade the Public Utilities Commission of the state of California that it was great, that robo taxis were here and safe. And we know now that that's just, obviously untrue. And in
Yeah.
fact, Cruise, the PUC, or rather the DMV of
Yeah.
California, um, has suggested that maybe they were misled by Cruise in connection with at least one of the accidents
That
that's
happened in
gotten
San
so much
Francisco.
publicity.
That's right.
Waymo, which is another self-driving vehicle company, has just come out with a paper that says, we've proven that Waymo cars are much, much, much safer than cars driven by human beings. I've taken a close look at that paper, and I'm going to be writing about it maybe this week, and I'm not sure that it proves its case.
Yeah.
Maybe Waymo cars are safer than Cruise, but the
But
case
is it?
is, as far as I'm concerned, the case has not been made that they're safer,
No.
universally and invariably safer than human. So we're
Is
going to
it?
see that. And the main point that I was making is that the siren song of great profits and something new is always there
Yeah.
in high tech, and it's always there in the investment community. And when one thing falls apart, there's typically something else waiting in the wings. I don't
Yeah.
know if it's going to be AI, self-driving cars, but it's going to be something,
Yeah.
because the goal of getting in on the ground floor of something that may be a big thing is just too powerful.
You mentioned self-driving cars, and so I'll tell you the new word out this morning on Cruise is that they're recalling about 1,000 driverless cars after that crash in San Francisco you mentioned. But it's not just in San Francisco. They're pulling them from all the cities where they are involved in testing. They say that the direction subsystem of the automated driving software could respond improperly after a crash, according to the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. And so not only are they stopped in California now, but all the other states that they're involved in testing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think the shame here, or maybe to go stronger and say the crime here, is that they've been testing these vehicles on public roads where they're mixing with innocent motorists. And
Yeah.
if you're not 100% or 1,000% sure that they're
Yeah.
going to always work correctly, you have no business putting them on the road
Right.
with people who don't know what's going on. And
Yeah.
for regulators to have allowed this at this stage is just outrageous.
You also wrote an article about Bidenomics, and it's a question I've been fascinated by as I'm paying more for everything at the grocery store. Yet, under the Biden administration, the economic outlook is actually better. Maybe not for people like me who are looking at their grocery store bill going, what is happening? But one of the questions you ask is, why isn't President Joe Biden getting more credit for the current economy?
Yeah, let's if you look at the economic indicators that we have at hand, the U.S. economy is very strong, and it's actually even stronger for middle and lower income Americans than for wealthier Americans. And unemployment has been below 4% for months and months and months. Inflation has come down sharply. Um, there's a lot to like about Bidenomics, if
Hmm.
we want to call it that.
Yeah.
Now, what you're looking at, and what a lot of people are looking at, and believe me, I got a lot of um, pushback on that
Yeah.
column from people who say, "Well, how come I'm paying more for
Ev-
gasoline, eggs,
Everything. Yeah.
everything than I used to?" And the reason is that inflation happened. And the fact that we now have inflation that by some measures is down to 2, maybe 3% a year, which is sort of traditional, when it spiked at 9.1% last year, or excuse me, in June. Well, that drove prices up, and it's not really likely that we're going to see prices of commodities like food come back down to any great extent, although we are seeing gasoline come way down from
Yeah.
where it peaked. So, but gasoline prices, the inflation in gasoline is based on the price of crude oil, and that
Right.
fluctuates and it's coming down. The price of food is sort of there and established. So, what you want to see is for wages actually gain on existing prices. And we are seeing that. In fact, wage rates, especially for middle and working class people, have been coming in at better than inflation for several months. So that's what's going to actually bring the recovery. But if people expect that, now that inflation is back down to a reasonable level, we're going to see prices that we saw in 2020 or 2021 or even early 22, that's not going to happen. And people, I mean, sadly enough, we're going to have to get used to paying more for certain things, but they're paying less for
Yeah.
used cars and trucks. They're paying less for energy. They're paying
Right.
less for
Unless,
electronic
um,
devices,
um,
TVs, and what
unless you're
have
a
you.
PG&E customer, our rates keep going up and up and up here. So
Well, yeah, PG is your cross to bear in Northern California,
I
unfortunately.
guess the question is, how does the Biden administration or how do the Democrats convince voters that the economy is doing better when it doesn't feel so much better in other regards?
Yeah, I think there's some evidence that this polls or the sense that people hate people who are unhappy with the economy may be
Yeah.
overstated, and
Okay.
then you move into this idea that well, Biden is unpopular because of the economy, and my take on that is that and that's going to be trouble for him in the
Hmm.
presidential election next year. And my take on that is, look, the presidential election next year is not going to be a referendum on do you like Joe Biden or do you not like Joe Biden. A presidential election is two candidates, occasionally three, but mostly two candidates who are running against each other and making the case against each other. And if that, as it seems to be likely, is going to be Biden versus Trump, then what makes anybody think that Trump would do better as a steward of the economy than Biden has been? I mean, let's not forget that inflation bottomed out and gas prices bottomed out in April of 2020 when Trump was president, and they started rising inexorably from there when Trump was president. So, whatever trends you want to point to started over him.
Right.
The unemployment rate was higher, all these things. And, if Trump can make the case, legitimately that he'd be better at running the economy than Biden, let's hear him do that. But
Right.
he's not even bothering to do that right now. Every presentation he makes, every speech, every rally is basically, I won the last election and, it was stolen. He doesn't even try to discuss economic policy, but he's going to have to when he runs.
And I think a lot of people are paying attention to the economy. It's going to be a massive issue for a lot of people. So he better come up with something to say. Or maybe he doesn't have to. Maybe he just points to Joe Biden and says, look at your bills now. That's all he has to say.
Yeah, well, maybe that'll be enough, but I doubt it. And I think,
Mm.
by the way, that the results of the election yesterday
Right.
basically tell a story about Trump, and that is that the American public, in general terms, hates Trump. Every candidate that he's endorsed, going back to 2021, has lost.
Yeah.
The culture war that he's running on has been basically repudiated by voters, even in the reddest of red states.
Hmm.
Um, you know, um, and as the campaign progresses and he's got to spend more time out in public, people are going to be repelled,
Yeah.
I think, even more than they are. But there's no evidence that the general public really likes Trump. There's no evidence that there's a Trump bloc that can win him the election. That's sort of fantasy.
Last question. Can we talk about Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, and his plan to cut the IRS budget by, what is it, $14.3 billion, so that will be the money that we can then vote to give to Israel? Does this make sense to you? What are there holes in this theory?
Well, it makes sense as a expression of Republican, um, uh, traditional Republican mores. I mean, the Republicans have been fighting the increase in IRS budget that was put in place last year under the Inflation Recovery Act of $80 billion, I think, over 10 years. They've been fighting that from the start. And the reason is because they know that money is going to be used in enforcement. And the people who are going to be enforced are the tax cheats. And most of them, or most tax cheating, goes on among the 1%. And we've got,
No.
and I've written columns sort of laying out in chapter and verse how we know this.
Yeah.
So when Johnson says, we're going to take the money out of the IRS budget, we all know what's going on here. He wants to basically play to his patrons, or the Republican patrons, who are rich Americans and corporations, and by the way, we know, number one, that this proposal of his is going to be dead on arrival in the U.S. Senate, and number two, just more generally, this guy is one weird guy, and the
Yeah.
worst thing that probably ever happened to him is becoming speaker, because no one even knew who the hell he was
Right.
before that, and now they do, and they're looking at everything from his personal finances to his family life to this weird story of his supposedly adopting a black youth when he was not even married yet. It's just, I mean, this guy is basically not passing the smell test, and the stench is only going to get worse. And also, of course, he's got a job to do, which is, to avoid a government shutdown in a week or two. And he doesn't look to have made any progress on that or devoted any attention to that whatsoever. So he's a bust.
Yeah. Last question, and then I'll let you get back to your busy day at the LA Times. The Google antitrust trial, and you're saying this is something that should be open to the public. They're being very behind closed doors secretive about what's going on here. Is there a reason for that?
Yeah, Google claims, and not only Google, but some of its business partners who are enmeshed in this case, so they're not defendants. That includes Apple.
Hmm.
Um, Google claims that if everything that's been presented in court or filed in court was was open and unredacted, then a lot of its business secrets, its proprietary secrets, would be exposed to public view, and that's unfair. And unfortunately for all of us, they've got a judge in that case who's bought that argument
Yeah.
far more than he should. When we get versions of papers and documents that have been filed in court, they have these big black bars
Redacted. Yeah.
across them because they're redacted,
Yeah.
and some of them aren't allowed in open court at all. And to me, this is just another manifestation of the idea that there are two judicial systems in this country. There's one for the rich and the well-connected and corporations, and there's one for everybody else, and that includes us. And Google is just playing the game of the first and getting, a lot, if not most, of what it wants, and the rest of us are on the outside looking in, and that's wrong.
Michael Hiltzik, I think you should have a million Pulitzer Prizes, like all over the office. Just give them all to Michael Hiltzik. Thank you for always being willing to pop onto the Mark Thompson Show and share your knowledge with us. And thanks for coming on today.
All right, Kim, thanks for having me.
See you next time. Bye, Michael Hiltzik.
See you next time.
Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell, you'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.